And off we go. So welcome everyone. This is a little talk, and demonstration, which is entitled Combinatorics for Groovy Odd Metrics. So what it is, it's essentially about a book, which I'm completing as we speak, which is mainly aimed at percussionists, but also at musicians who are interested in such things. I mean, evidently, drummers, percussionists need to lead the way into groovy odd metrics, at least it seems so. But I would think that it also helps people who are just producing stuff and are interested in more unconventional rhythms. So where it all comes from, odd meters come from many places. It seems to me that Indian musical tradition is, responsible for the Indo-European musical traditions mostly, just like the Indo-European languages are rooted in that part of the world. And through their development of math, which preceded the Greek math, they've actually connected these domains, the music, the rhythm, and the mathematics, quite early on. So if you look at the contemporary Indian musical practice in terms of rhythm complexity, it's probably one of the most advanced globally. So that's one of the entries into odd meters, is through just, understanding numbers and applying numbers to rhythm. Now, I would say that historically the rhythm, the dance, and the music and the tribal ceremony are one. So if you kind of imagine advanced monkeys, doing stuff together for different occasions, be it harvest or some kind of fertility or cosmic equalities, whatever, astronomy. All these things happen together. In fact, I would say that the situation where you have people who listen to the music or attend the ceremony is somewhat new compared to the tribal situation where everyone contributes, is part of it. And in that, I seem to think that the music today still can be distinguished based on that basic delineation principle, which is folk music, whereby everyone is part of the happening, and the other one being the court music, where, I mean, initially the king is sad and fat and doesn't do shit. And then the musicians are, they're the kind of people who have been fed all their lives just in order to perform something complex for the king. So obviously those are extremes, but still I would think that today, typically the music that you're supposed to dance to, that has a sense of community building, sharing, opening up, comes from the folk tradition. And the music where you're supposed to just, observe the beauty and the virtuosity is a different, is a more of a court music. So you see how actually this virtuosity already stands on the side of the court music. And no matter the fact that you could say that, dance music producers are virtuosos, they are not necessarily as virtuosic, and it's not about the virtuosity of theirs, it's about them projecting the party vibe or whatever else. Okay, so in that sense also the mathematics that relate to music are part of the court development, because if you consider the traditional setting of a tribal ceremony, you can assume that the development of the content within the ceremony is always happening during the ceremony. There is no reason and likely no space or time for someone to, you know, prepare before the ceremony. This preparation before is also a part of the court tradition, right? To include the lifetime's worth of preparation. So to include other domains and try to make them musical and, you know, develop the art in itself without the attendance of the audience is a kind of a court thing. It's a kind of it's the type of thing that is quite distinct from the ceremonial, the tribal ceremony. Okay, so now the funny thing is, the reason while I'm starting to talk about these distinctions, I mean, obviously I find them fascinating myself, but one of the main reasons is that the odd metrics traditions in the Balkans, where I draw my roots from, part of them at least, is a folk tradition. So the way odd meters develop in the Balkans are such that they develop together with a dance. Obviously you have lamenting songs and songs that you're not supposed to jump around to. But typically when I say groovy odd metrics, I'm considering the music that's supposed to move you physically and make you feel good about your physical displacement. So the crucial thing is that the Balkanic odd meters are dance based mostly. And that's the tradition that I'm drawing on the most. So in that tradition, I would argue that the rhythm precedes the mathematics. So typically what you are looking at is musicians being in sync, or, you know, kind of being together with the dancers. So they kind of follow each other. They measure each other constantly. It's a bit like people playing in a band. It's about the unity. It's not about someone following someone else necessarily. And I would argue that the fact that you have a longer duration and a shorter duration is just part of a specific movement. It's not necessarily a math-based thing. And what you will find in the Balkanic odd meter structures is an additive principle, which is actually also a principle that precedes the kind of mathematical thinking, which is what we call the divisive principle, right? So you have a certain duration, you divide it in equal parts, and each one of these divisions is further divided in equal parts. So that's the divisive, whereas the additive principle has to do with, I have a duration, and after that's done, after I'm through with that length, I have another length. So you're kind of adding things together, adding them on top of each other. So there's this additive principle that is fairly important. Okay, so as I'm getting into more specific things here, it's quite crucial to think about this long and short. In fact, for the people who are kind of getting into this domain currently, I would suggest that this is the best way to start listening to this music. I mean, as a matter of you know, history, I think my first encounter with odd meters in terms of actually understanding them was around the age of 14 or so. I was kind of becoming a little drummer, and we have what we call rudiments in drumming, and we have a thing that's called a paradiddle. So I'll try to demonstrate this. And then you had different combinations. So a paradiddle is right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, which is a kind of a 4-beat. And then you would have the paradiddle, which is 2 doubles, or actually right, left, right, left, right, right. And then you can produce a combination of these two, an additive combination, so that you do one and then the other. And that's a bit like this. And, you know, as a kid, kind of starting to do drumming, loving it, that was the first thing when I felt, okay, well, there is something very specific about this combination. Um, and it just caught my ear. And actually only after that, I realized that most of the Balkan folk music is in odd meters. So this was a kind of a 4+6, which makes a 10, which is a kind of a 5. So once you, you know, probably everyone knows this, and obviously in these days, most of us start with a sequencer, and you can just change the meter there and play with these things. But you probably, if you've played with this, you understand that it just does not produce groovy rhythms. So that's the main thing that I'm going to tackle here. So if you get into listening to this Balkan music tradition, typically the rhythms are quite fast, and in that, what you get is an issue if you try to count these things. But what you can always get to is a long short type of sequence, and typically the simple things are actually just a long and a short, one after the other, and you can almost sing it. So I'll demonstrate this and kind of talk about this in a second. So that's a bit of an intro there. And then we get to the general intro on what I'm gonna talk about specifically. Okay, so as I said, this is all about this book, which is soon to be completed, called Combinatorics for Groovy Odd Metrics, which is about 1,200 bars of score of rhythms spelled out, about 70 pages. So there is maybe 55 pages of scores only, and about 10-15 pages of explanation. So it's really score heavy. And it is scored such that you only have, well, actually there is one group which has 3 different pitches, but all of them are just 2. So it's essentially everything about the right, left hand playing different things. But because it's so generic, you can actually use it, you know, even on a keyboard for left, right hand, for different pitches, but also to just develop your sense of these rhythms. So it is all about the systemic exploration of the domain. Okay, so actually this came from this idea of the powerfulness of the interest in systemic exploration, came from my studies of analog electronics for music back in Netherlands. And initially, like most of us, we were fascinated by the creativity. And we're kind of typically convinced that, you know, if we have the right tools and if we have, you know, the right mood, the condition, the state of mind, that we will then, you know, just make amazing stuff. And that is very often the case. That's what I would call intuitive composition, music making. So as I was studying sonology, which is kind of a music tech degree for weird stuff in Netherlands, I realized that actually systemic exploration takes me further. So I realized that perpetuating my intuition kind of brings me back to the same thing all over again. Whereas if I have a combinatorial scheme, so if I have something that will, you know, give me all the possibilities, so to speak, all the perturbations, to use a fancy term, then I actually encounter stuff that would never appear, never happen without the systemic approach. Okay, so that's part of the deal. Now, the other side of this story is that the fascination with systemic exploration, or, you know, the all the variations, all the possibilities, kind of invites the type of music that I find aesthetically less pleasing, which is the formalistic approach whereby, okay, I have a system and I'm gonna spell out all the 128 possibilities, and you, dear listener, will have to go through all of these and just hear them, because that has a special beauty, special symmetry. There is something about this kind of approach that fascinates people, which is fine, from the perspective of being engaged with the formal structure around the music. However, I like the music to be self-contained and not necessarily relate to formal structures, or indeed necessitate the inclusion of the formal structure in order to understand what it's all about. And especially when I'm talking about groovy odd meters, it just has to groove. There is no need for someone to explain why does it groove. Everyone knows how well it grooves for themselves. So I'm also trying to avoid that extremity where I'm saying, okay, well, here are all the combinations and that's it. So I'm kind of working in the domain between, intuitively picking stuff, but also using the combinatorics to open up combinations that I would not think of. Okay, so that's this bit about systemic exploration. Now, talking about symmetry, here comes one of my favorite, it's not a joke, it's not an anecdote, it's a statement, which is that an odd meter is symmetrical for a bipedal advanced monkey like myself. Okay, so what am I saying here? I'm saying that if I have an even meter, so I have an even amount of beats, and I have two hands, what happens is that I end up accenting the same hand. Okay, so if I do a 4 beat with alternating hands, so that's why I was talking about bipedal, property of advanced monkeys, which is, walking right, left, right, left. So if I do an even meter, then I will end up on the right hand. So let's do a 4. Okay, so if I end up on the right hand continuously, it's asymmetrical. If I do something which is odd, then I will get a symmetry in there. So if I do a 5, if I do a 7, okay, so everything that is an odd number will actually force the symmetry, because at one point I will be on the right hand, at another point I will be on the left hand, and I will be alternating these. So odd meters are totally symmetrical for bipedal advanced monkeys. And that's the crucial thing that really allows us to enter this domain with the sense of balance. Okay, so part of the awkwardness in the way odd meters are interpreted in Western music is that they're locked into their little space. Okay, so if you ask a drummer to play a 5 or a 7, he'll be like right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, left, for example. So you always kind of jump to the next bar, and there is very little overarching structure beyond that bar. So you're actually kind of stuck in a loop, and at that likely an uncomfortable loop. Now, if you manage to understand the symmetry of these things, then you actually get a very natural, okay, now it's starting on the right, now it's starting on the left, now it's starting on the right, starting on the left, and there is no jumping across, before into the dip, whatever other sensation you might have, because of the gentleness, because of the naturalness of this right-left motion. In fact, if you look at salsa dance steps, which is actually a 4-bar thing, they actually make 3 steps per bar. So they go right, left, right, and then just kind of step away with the left without changing the center of the weight. So it's actually right, left, right, and then kind of a pause, and then left, right, left, pause. And this pause is actually the accent, because it's the fourth beat, which is always the kind of the perpetuating, the driving rhythmical element in this music. So you actually see how dancers as well, even if the rhythm is asymmetrical, right? Even if it would, you know, always make you step with the right foot, you actually find ways to make it symmetrical, to just to give you a physical balance of stuff, you know, being natural. Okay. So in that sense, this symmetry is quite crucial. And I think it's very crucial in the very beginning as well, because if you play percussion or otherwise any instrument, the right, left is a really natural thing that you're unlikely to mess up, even if you get distracted. Okay, so actually, if I, for example, play the, let's do a 7, okay, and I will do the symmetrical thing, but I will kind of orchestrate it around. So let's just accentuate the first eighth, okay? So I will do like. Okay, so it's really difficult to mess up if this comes, if you learn the naturalness of this symmetry, then it starts making sense. And then you can actually include movements around the kit or whatever instrument you play, and physically you will be back on the one in the right place, which is really crucial because it frees up your mind. You don't have to keep counting things, it comes naturally. If I do a similar thing, so obviously it's not about me performing too much here, but just as a matter of demonstration and principle, this symmetry is crucial. So actually the first half of the book is totally symmetrical. So every bar is repeated with the opposite sticking, as we call it in drumming, just in order to establish the symmetry to be very strong. And once you have the symmetry, then oh God, okay, guys, you might have to log back in. We'll see how that happens. So once you get the symmetry going, then the phrasing across bars opens up as well, because suddenly you have the right, which is one bar, then you have the left, which is the next bar. And once you have the two bars with right and left, the anticipation for the next two bars is a very strong sensation. So you actually start to understand the larger structures right there. Okay, so the next thing I like to briefly talk about is the up and down motion. Okay, so for me, that's totally crucial. If you want to groove in an odd meter, it has to go up and down. It has to be, hip hop is the one that really goes up and down. I mean, some other, you know, higher tempo music does too, but typically when you have this prominent kick, it's always down, 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 down. And typically if you have a kind of a jazzy, fleety thing, it's always up, up, and it's kind of floating on the top. And the hip hop is the one that actually has this, okay, down and up, down and up. And this type of motion of down and up, which is very pronounced, I find totally crucial. So that's the kind of thing that you notice in terms of, you know, something being actually groovy. Another principle there is question and answer. Okay, so again, this kind of right-left symmetry, you know, if these things start taking shape. And in order to get this to really work, what we're looking at is lower tempo. Okay, so if you have a high tempo, you don't really get the time to make a large up and down amplitude. Okay, so that's basically what I'm talking about. Now, in this session, and actually in this book, I'm dealing pretty much with 8-beat pulsations only. Okay, because then the down and the up get to have a different duration. Okay, so if I was to do, so for example, what I've done now in terms of 7/8. Okay, so I have 3 after the bass and 3 after the snare. Just push this a bit more. Okay. Now, if I did a 7/16 beat, then actually I would have equal duration for the bass and the snare. So I would have, I don't know. Which is cool, nothing wrong with that. It looks a bit more like 7 tuplets. And then if I would have 7 quarters, then it would be very slow. Then it would be kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That's your typical 7/4 beat, which gives you a sense of, okay, there is something regular happening, and then there is some odd thing happening after that. So the reason why I'm sticking to 8th notes is exactly because of this skewed duration in terms of the down and the up motion. And there is no sense of 2 things bolted onto each other, potentially. And it's not a 16th beat such that, you know, they equal out like that. Yeah, now briefly about the sticking. So sticking in drums, among drummers, is the term that we use to tell someone which limb to use. So it's kind of distinct from the rhythm. So you can play the same rhythm with different stickings. Now, this is totally crucial in my opinion, because the order of limbs that you use determine what type of articulation comes natural. You could arguably play the exact same micro timing with all the possible stickings, but it doesn't come naturally. In fact, as soon as you start to use a different sticking, a different order of limbs, you get a different feel in the rhythm, which has to do with both the timing, micro timing, and the dynamics. And you know, arguably you can do that otherwise, but I'm totally subscribing to this natural thing. So I can do a little demonstration here. So for example, if I say, okay, let's do a 5 with alternating hands, which is the basic thing that I propose. So okay, it has a certain roll to it, a certain feel. Then I can do it with different sticking, so maybe doubling the left hand, so I get an asymmetrical one. Okay, I can do one where I do 2 plus 3. I can do probably a few more. I can do 2 doubles. And obviously I didn't quite get into articulating these stickings, showing you how they push and pull the beat in a different way, but that's what I'm getting at. In fact, it's one of the interesting research questions I haven't seen tackled yet. I might have a chance to do it myself, is to actually measure and figure out what are the properties of different sticking. So for example, if I'm doubling something with a single limb, it seems that the dynamic will depend on this to some extent. So it's typically not as even as if I play it with 2 different hands. Depending on the tempo, the timing will be different. So if it's a fast tempo, then I'm likely to drag. And if it's a slow tempo and I do a double stroke, then I'm likely to be a bit faster. So there is a micro timing implication, there's a dynamic implication in terms of how these stickings are natural as they're played. And that's why, you know, in the performance of these things, I always promote, at least to start with, the first half of the book is all about symmetrical stickings. Okay, and then the whole book will actually consist of 10 chapters. 5 of them are linear principles, and 5 of them are parallel. So linear principle in drumming is when there is never both hands playing at the same time. So it's either right or left. That's what we call linear. And parallel will be the set of combinations, the set of principles where left and the right hand do start at the same time or play at the same time, flams excluded. Okay, so it will be those 10 things. So here they are. These are my alternating patterns. So essentially, I'm taking 5 different meters: 5, 8, 7, 8, 9, and 11, 8, and 13, 8. And I will play you these and introduce the reason why they are grouped like this after a short break. So hopefully you can log back in with the same link. Otherwise, I'll just email out the new link. It's my first Zoom thing. I'm totally novice to this. So I'll see you guys in a second. Okay, guys, second part coming up. Cool, so we got to these alternating hands. Now, what I have here is different groupings for the same meter. So in 7/8, I have 4 plus 3. So it's a group of 4 where the first one is accented and the 5th one, technically. And then you see it turns around. So here I start with the right, here I do the left. And then I have 3 plus 4, okay? And then I have a 2, 3, 2. Now, obviously, there is some symmetry here, but these two are fairly common in traditional Balkan music. Kind of skipped the 5 where I have 2 plus 3, and this should read 3 plus 2. That's a mistake. Or indeed a kind of a group of 5 together. So I understand the order is not great, but I'll just play maybe some of these. You should see the accentuation, and that's the important thing in terms of my hands moving, even if the audio is ducked with F as well. So I have these in 7, I have in 9. Well, actually, I call it a Serbian 9, where the 3 is in the end, which is kind of the natural thing, because typically in music, at the end of the phrase, you extend the time duration. So it kind of fortifies the bar-related phrasing. This one I call a Turkish 9. I find Turkish 9s have most often the accent, the 3 duration on the 3rd spot. So I'll play this one as well. 2, 3, 2, 2 is, well, it's a kind of a derivative from those, not as often to be found in folk music. And obviously you can do the 3, 2, 2 as well. So typically as I progress here, I will keep talking about principles, and I'm not gonna apply the principles to everything. But allow you to extrapolate those and go further if you find that interesting. Now in 11/8, we have the traditional division, which is 4/3/4, a lot of Balkan, Bulgarian, Macedonian folk music with 4/3/4 patterns. And as a matter of doing something different in 11, I have a 3/3/2/3. So I'll play this one as well. So typically what I will do when I play these, I hope it'll be a little bit audible, is I will do the accents maybe first time around just on the same instrument. And then I'll do the kick, snare, accents alternating, because that's when these rhythms really, the divisions become really clear. Okay. And that's the point. I mean, the point about these things being groovy is that the beat is always a downbeat, right? So that's the kind of thing that happens to a non-groovy odd meter, is that everything is up in the air and every strike is a bit like, oh, I didn't quite expect it there, which means it's kind of throwing me off. It keeps throwing me off. And the art to make this stuff groove is, you know, something that has to do with the establishing the expectation such that it's always expected and in its right place. Okay. And in fact, one of the things I've discovered in making such stuff for actually more than a decade now is that non-musicians typically don't really figure that something's different, that something's wrong. And then the amateur musicians, they have an issue because they would like to kind of frame it in what they're used to. And the professional musicians, they typically recognize the meter and they can follow it anyway. So it's really interesting how the amateur musicians typically have an issue, whereas the non-musicians, if it's actually a groovy odd meter, they hardly notice that. I mean, it's a kind of a peculiar beat, right? But nothing much more than that. And then there's one other thing which I wanted to say in the intro, but you see my setup. I've recently understood that one of the most cynical things about being a drummer is, you know, trying to make people dance while you are set, because you can't dance, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna make you dance, and it's like, okay, well, you know, from this folk perspective that I started with, the ceremonial perspective, well, how am I supposed to make you dance if I'm not dancing myself? So at that stage, I become a timbalero, which is the, you know, timbales player who is totally grooving hips back and forth constantly. And it's also good for my lower back. So that's my new setup with the kind of bass, snare, and other things, all accessible while stood. Okay, so that's 11, and then the 13. Well, for 13, I have a 4-5-4 grouping and a 3-3-3-4. So in terms of these groupings, obviously one cannot be really a grouping because then you get two accents next to each other, and it won't really act as a separate group. And then I avoid having two large groups and whatnots, but these I find to be somewhat natural like that. Okay, let's just play through some of these. So let's go with the 7. So 4 + 3. I'm gonna push this a bit more. Still not hearing much of this snare. So obviously I played the basic thing and then I throw in some variation, but keeping the alternating hands throughout. And this is really useful because you can actually, you know, you can tap like this throughout the day or whatever. It really, to start to learn this alternating hands really helps understand these rhythms. Okay, let's do a 3 + 4. So even if I mess it up, you see I kind of physically come back to the 1 because the alternating sticking just keeps me in place. Let's do some 9s. So 4 + 5, so kind of 2, 2, 2, 3. The Turkish one with the 3 in the 3rd spot, so it's so on and so forth. I won't take too long as I understand the transmission of audio is problematic. Let's just do the traditional 11, 4, 3, 4. So yeah, that's the first sheet, the first score sheet of the book, with these 5 meters and however many divisions. And actually these divisions and meters come back throughout the book. In fact, every chapter is 1 meter. And because there's 10 chapters, 5 meters, so every meter comes back twice. So it's fairly symmetrical. And as I said, the first half of the book, so I go through all the meters with linear principles when there is no hand doubling at all. And then other principles which allow for hand doubling. Okay, so first one, accelerating principle. So as I said, the first part of the book, it's a linear sticking strictly, and it's symmetrical strictly. So every bar will come back the same again with a different starting hand, which means that if I have a 5/8 beat and I want to keep this symmetry, I may introduce only an even amount of additional notes. So that's this accelerating thing, in the sense that I'm accelerating I'm playing more notes within those 5/8 notes. And then this is probably the simplest version. In this chapter, I have about 50 bars. I go through 2 semiquavers, which is this situation when they're stuck together. Then I go through all the options when they're apart. In fact, I believe that for this chapter, I've actually taken all the possible combinations. So typically, as you get into higher amount of quavers in there, the amount of options, the variations becomes huge and unmanageable. And at that point, I have different ways of reducing it. But at a low count, actually going through all the combinations is not too painful. So evidently, out of those 50 bars that constitute this chapter, I just have a little excerpt here to demonstrate what's going on. So here in this case, what I have is indeed in each bar, I have 7 strikes instead of 5. So I need an odd number to go back to the next one. So it's keeping the alternating hands. And this is one of those things that is actually fairly natural. As a young drummer, it was one of the first things that I've learned. So you do the right, left, and then you do a double speed like this. So I'll just play this one briefly for you. So this is, so first the basic 5, okay? So this is 2 + 3, so it's... So right there, I'm looping the first 2 bars. Okay, so I'll keep the first 2 bars looped, these 2. So you have the semiquavers in the beginning, and then I'll get to the second, so the third and the fourth. I didn't screen grab the rest of it. See how far I get before I make a stupid mistake, okay? Okay, so that's approximately that. Cool, so that's this accelerating principle. And then I deal with semiquavers in this chapter. Then I throw in some triplets as well. So a triplet will typically add a single extra strike. So I will actually have to have a semiquaver in there as well, because instead of 2, you get 3. And I need to keep adding 2 in order to keep the symmetry. And then I have a few variations with dotted semiquavers. In fact, I go into septuplets a bit as well. So kind of a lot of the combinatorics here. So if someone feels like, okay, I can sort of play these things, or I'm happy to send you, scores for verification. You can imagine 1,200 bars. It actually goes beyond beyond something that you can, you know, make sure has no mistakes. Okay, next one, I have 7/8 embellishments. Okay, so this is a different principle. The alternating hands doesn't hold anymore, but the symmetry does hold. So every bar is repeated with a different starting hand. And here essentially what I have is, what is it, 6, I believe, type of embellishments, which will relate to only one hand within the whole bar for one given metric position. Obviously, as you progress, you will probably play these embellishments on top of each other within the same bar. But essentially, what it is that as I do the alternating hands, at one point, one of the hands can do more than just a proper 8th note in there. And there are variations as follows. So I can do a double with that hand such that I start immediately a 16th later than the previous hand. Okay, so if I do this left-right, I can do it on the laptop probably as well. So if I go, it's my right-left. I'm not sure if you can hear that. And I've actually played it in 4. So let me just play these 2 bars in a loop so that you can get this first embellishment with a double that comes straight after the previous hand. So it's a bit like this. Okay, and then the one after is again a double, but this time it comes an 8th later. So it's a 16th double, but comes a bit later, which is like this. Okay, then I have the same kind of principle of shifting something just next to the previous one and shifting it just next to the next one, close to the next one. But it's not a double, it's a single. So you get this kind of, you're essentially shifting the 8th note back and forth there. So it's like, and then shifting it forth. And then having a double syncopated. So in that gap, so you understand that instead of that one 8th note, you can actually have 3 16th values. So it's about making a combination of these 3. And now I'm doing the syncopation one, which means the first and the third. Okay, and then finally I fill up all 3 16th note values. Okay, so those are the 6 variations, and then in the full book, what you get is those shifted to every possible hand, and that's quite powerful because, you know, intuitively, even though you might be very much into this type of rhythmical structures, you don't get there. So it's really crucial to go through these things to learn the musicality of these options. And then once you're composing or performing, then these can actually arise intuitively. So that's the point. I'm not saying that in performance you exclude intuition, but I'm saying you enrich the intuition with this systemic exploration. And in fact, these things get quite groovy. One of the things that I typically do is make the embellishments ghost notes on a snare drum. And things get quite funky as you start shifting this around. So actually it ends up being 60 bars. So this is 10 bars. No, what am I saying here? So this is 6 variations, 12 bars, and then 5 times that, because actually I'm never embellishing the accents in this set of combinations because they remain the downbeat, the kick and the snare. and all the rest of it is shifting. Okay, so that's this embellishment principle right there. Okay, next one up, I have this swapping principle. So it's actually a whole, it opens a whole can of worms in terms of combinatorics, because what I'm considering is not the actual notes played, but I'm considering swapping hands. So I'm playing out all the eighth notes throughout this principle set of exercises. And I'm really focusing on how many times I change the hand and when in the bar do I change the hand, okay? So the basic thing here is, so this one is all in nines. And as I said, all these principles can be extrapolated. So actually I could take this embellishing principle and play 5/8 stuff with the principle. I can take the accelerating principle and develop all the variations for 7/8. So it kind of shows, you know, the explosion of stuff as well. But nevertheless, I'm always focusing on scoring out stuff that I find inherently musical and groovy like that. So the swapping principle, as I said, has everything to do with that. Now, what I have here again is a constraint that it has to be symmetrical. So the next bar has to start with the other hand. So that is useful because it constrains the amount of possibilities as well. And it makes it a bit more tricky, I guess. And typically, you know, drummers, performers who can read music, they could just read this stuff through anyway. Okay, there goes my digital paper. Goodbye. So that's quite crucial because, you know, it's supposed to be a good challenge as well. And the other thing which is worth adding, which I'll probably talk about when I get to the bop stuff, is that actually each one of these bars, if you ask a professional musician, okay, here's this one bar, or actually I should, you know, take 2 bars because it's a kind of a symmetry. It's the same rhythmical structure with a different starting hand. If I take these 2 bars and I ask any good musician, can you play this? They don't have to think about it, they'll just play it. But if I tell someone, okay, you have to make this groove really well, then they could take 10 minutes, an hour to get it really grooving well. Because then at that stage, the dynamics have to work out really well. They have to have a really large contrast. Okay, the timing has to serve the dynamics, right? And then the orchestration, you know, where do you play which beat? And then once you really get a groove going from this thing, then there's only a few set of things which work well as a variation. Okay, so it really, the biggest challenge is to make it groove. I mean, to play this out for someone who can read music, it's not really a huge challenge. But to make it groove to the extent that people get up and dance, that's the thing. Okay, so back to the swapping principle. So I said I have a few constraints here. This is fairly large chapter, about 150 bars. So these are the variations I go through. I have 4 doubles, and then 2 doubles, right? So it means that the rest are alternating. I can have 2 triples, so 3, 3, single, single, single. Okay, that comes to 9. And then I'm ended up at the next hand. Okay, so again, I'm highlighting only the combinations that allow for the symmetry, and also 2 doubles and a triplet allows for the symmetry. So right, right, left, left, right, 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 left, right. Did I say this right? Yeah. And then it starts with the left, 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 right, 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 left, left, right, left. Okay, so it's about this symmetry. So obviously this is just to show you how the combinatorics develop. What I have here is a fairly basic, it's the first bar and the one below that, because actually in this chapter I also play with the accents. So as a matter of demonstration, what this is, sorry, that was a 7, so it's a 9. and then I can combine it with the second one below, which where you get, well, you get what you see. So it's a bit like this. I'll play 2 bars of each. Okay, so you get kind of this one note shifting. And again, the stuff with the sticking, what you see here is that, you know, it comes naturally to be an accent when you have a single stroke. Okay, because you have the time to make the motion, and it just comes naturally. And that's one of the crucial things in the design of these combinations, to have the rhythm be really, well, organic is an overused word, but in that sense very natural, that there is no, I mean, it's part of the drumming performance, the motions of the drumming. If you're just playing dots, it's, you know, it's physically harmful, and musically probably as well. So these durations are really crucial, and the amount of movement that you can make. And in fact, with the drums, learning to make these larger movements is really helpful once you have to reach out to different drums. So that's the swapping principle. Oh, I do have another one. That's the third one. So you see, again, I have doubles, and only one is a single. So I won't go through all the others. Let's go on with different principles here. So flams. So in 11/8, what I come to do is include flams. So again, it's kind of akin to my accelerating principle. So I'm adding notes into the bar. All the existing eighths are playing. And in order to keep the symmetry, I have to add 2 flams, or 4 flams, or 6 flams. So that's how it progressively develops. And here, because I'm getting into a large number of values within a single bar, the amount of combinations explode. And in order to maintain grooviness, I have to prioritize notes. Okay, so this note prioritization principle I have learned from one of my amazing teachers, a guy called Clarence Barlow, who has come up with the indispensability principle. And he's actually an amazing mathematician, so he came up with an equation which is totally chunky and has the kind of science I never see otherwise, to actually express this as a regular thing in terms of essentially the primacy of different beats in the bar. Okay, so I'll try to explain this indispensability principle. So the term itself, what it's supposed to mean is that certain bars, hello, some of you might be excited. There's no actual exam that you're seeing here. It's my sketches of making it. So this indispensability principle has everything to do with claiming that a certain note value, a certain metric value, I should say, is indispensable. Why is it indispensable? Why can you not do without it? Well, because you will lose the sense of rhythm. You will lose the sense of the metric characteristic that you're supposed to preserve. Okay, so that's why this principle is really crucial here. We're about to have another little break. Because in order to maintain the sense of this metric structure, I need the accents to stay there. Okay, so that's the main thing here. So how does this principle work? So there's 2 things. One is you can use Clarence's equation. Actually, no one can use Clarence's equation. It's pretty, and that's that probably. But what's a good way of doing this is actually figuring it out yourself. So essentially what I have to do then, in order to come up with an indispensability structure for my 11/8 bar, is essentially assign different Oh my God, can I not just duplicate? There we go. So what I have to do is assign different values, different primacy to each metric value. So I have 11 values here, okay? So in this first example, what I'm doing is I'm grouping 4 by 4, merge cells, okay? So I have a group of 4, then I have a group of 3, and then I have another group of 4. Okay. Now, in this, the most important metric value is this one, the first one. So I'm giving it 11 points. Okay, so what I'm doing thus is I'm going to give each metric value in a bar a number of points, which will tell us how important it is. So this one is the most important. Now, the other two important ones, you know, in order to preserve the metric sensation that, okay, if I get the one, at least keep giving me the one. And then if you mess around with the rest, you know, it's less painful at least. So the other two, which are really crucial, are these two. And the question is, which one is more crucial? Now, in this indispensability mapping, I kind of took it from Clarence as well. The second one, the one before the most important accent is more important than the one straight after. Okay, so if I was to play a 3-beat, okay, so it's 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Okay, so what I'm saying is that the one before the leading note is more important than the following, which means that this rhythm would be more natural than the other option where I do the one in the middle. Okay, so that's this principle that the leading note is more important, meaning that I give 10 points to this one and give 9 points to this one. Oops, 9. Okay, now next up. Typically, these two blocks, because they kind of divide this group of 4 into 2, are more important. Okay, and again, I'm prioritizing the leading note. So actually, I would pick this one to have the value 8. So actually, in this 11/8 meter, okay, so it's 4 3 4. So it's fourths, threes, fourths, fourths, threes, 4, fourths, threes, 4 4 fourths, threes, 4 4 fourths. 2 2 4. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. I'm essentially devising a scheme of naturalness, of rhythms within this metric structure. Okay, and now the question is, well, actually I said that the division to 2 is kind of cool, but leading is also fairly important. It's a bit of a mixed bag. I would probably, you know, on a different day, I'd give a 7 to different points. This one is actually really important. So if I do this one, what I have is tunes. Okay, if I put a 7 here, so I play that instead of this one, then I get a rhythm like this. Which is natural to me, but it kind of makes this metric value sound as the 1. Because all of these kind of merge together into one big crescendo almost. So indeed, I would probably give a 7 here, and then a 6 here. And then I can accelerate it a bit. So again, the leading principle here has primacy. So this one is probably a 5 for me. And then maybe this one 4. So you can actually design this based on what you feel. And obviously trying out these rhythms is quite crucial. Typically, what you get is the least indispensable metric value is the one straight after the first beat, because the first beat, you know, it gains primacy through having nothing follow it. It's like boom, finally, that's the most important beat. So this kind of minimum after maximum is a typical arrangement. Okay, so that is the principle and the practice of indispensability. So what I've done with the chapter E, with flams in 11/8 rhythm, is essentially follow that. So you see, I start with the most important metric values and flam those. So in this case, you see I have the first one and then whatever the order there, 5, 6, 7, the eighth one. Okay. And then because I'm keeping to 2 flams per bar, I'm actually writing down this scale. So the next one will be 11 and 9, right? Sorry, 11 and 9 here. And the one after will be 9 and 10. So essentially I'm adding up the 2 values and I'm ordering the set of things to have the most natural accents come first. And then until I finish the page, and once the page or 2 is finished, then I'm like, okay, that's plenty. So typically I don't go down to the metric values. I'm not flamming the metric values which have low indispensability. Okay, and then finally, so it's nicely structured. This I could probably finish in 3 minutes because this is the last chapter of the first half of the book. So we arrive to the 13.8. It's the last principle that is linear. So there is never 2 hands playing the same beat. However, symmetry is coming back, but it's definitely the last strictly symmetrical principle that I'm showing here, which is the skipping principle. So obviously I've started with, including more notes because there were only 5 and it felt like there is room. But once I'm in 13.8 beat, there's quite a lot of notes. Actually leaving them out comes natural. And again, the constraint is it has to be symmetrical. So in each bar, I can take out 2 notes or 4 notes or 6 notes. So these are the combinations I go through in order to land on the other hand for the next bar. And the way I do this is I take the indispensability. Obviously, I've devised the table for the 13.8 and actually for 2 different subdivisions of 13.8, which actually held for the 11. So different indispensability for different subdivisions, because this one is the 4-3-4 subdivision. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually looking at the inverse indispensability because I'm trying to maintain the grooviness of the beat. So the notes that I can leave out the easiest are the least important notes. So what I get here then is this one is being left out as the first choice, and then number 2 as the second choice. Although, sorry, this is an 11.8 scheme. This is a 13.8 scheme. So actually in the first bar, these 2 were the least indispensable. So I left them out. And again, I climb the set of numbers starting from the bottom in this case. Okay, guys. So 5-10 minutes break until the video saves. And I'll see you back soon, I hope. Great. So welcome back. And let me talk about the second part of the book, which starts to allow doubling of hands. And the first principle here is including another thing, which is the combinatorics of choosing different instruments. So first, let me talk briefly about the doubling. Okay, so in this case, I'm in 5/8. Actually, this is wrong because this should be the same letter, either B or D. Because I kind of try to avoid the double term because it's a double in terms of striking twice with a single hand. So I use the B for both, as in both hands at the same time. So I'll say B for these as well. So the options I have is 1-2-2, which still has no overlap. It's the one that I kind of played before. So it's 1-2-2-2-2. Okay, so that's my 5/8 there. And then I'm looking at options which allow me, again, to have a cyclic 5/8 thing, but with both hands in there as well. So this is B1-1-1-1, which means I have both 1-1-1-1, both 1-1-1-1, both. And then I have a B1, B1, 1, meaning I have both 1, 1, 1, both 1, both 1. And obviously I'm playing them with a bit of a flam. And there was a combinatorial principle built around flams. But this one is slightly different in the way it's structured. Okay, so what I have here then are combinations that actually have only doubles and singles. I believe I have exhausted all the options in 5/8 with the specification of these remaining symmetrical. And then I have some of them which start to include triplets, meaning 3 strikes with a single hand. I mean, it's probably interesting just to think, because we were trying to focus on the combinatorial aspects here as well. So you see, for example, I have a B 1, 2, 1. Okay, so this means that I have both hands first. Okay, then I have one hand once, twice the other hand, and one hand here. So these are my 5/8. And then obviously the next bar will be symmetrical because after the excursion, after the double on, let's call this the right hand, I will have the double on the left hand. So it becomes a symmetrical thing. Okay. So it's interesting, for example, to think through, because if I think of B1, 1, 2 as an order of things, then this will actually include a triple. You see, because after 2 with the single hand, I do both, which means that I have had to play 3 times with a single hand. Okay, it's a kind of an exciting set of things there to consider in terms of, okay, what are the actual options with the given constraints. Okay, so actually the one that I've just drawn where the 2 is neatly against the B is actually among the set of combinations that involve a triple as well. So obviously start with 2, 3 with no both there. So just 2, 3, 2, 3, and so on. The rest should be evident there. Okay, so these are the combinations that go up to triples, keeping the symmetry, staying in 5/8. Because, for example, if I had D1, D1, 1, actually I had it here. So it's actually an interesting thing. I kind of went through these things. I might have made a few mistakes in terms of not thinking of a combination that is valid. But for now, it seems that this exhausts it. And obviously, I'll ask some experts to go through my combinations in the book before it's all published. Okay, so these are the combinations, and then this moving principle actually tries to exhaust the combinations in terms of moving to other sources. So the way I do this in my Timbalero setup, typically I have the center, the C, which is also on a drum kit, the snare drum. And then I have the motion out, which for the right hand is to the right, and for the left hand is to the left. Okay, so I distinguish this motion as being the outward motion for both hands, because that's always available and always natural. Okay, it could be outward motion forward as well, like that. So I have center and outward, so I can do center, 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 center. I can do outward, center, outward, center, center, outward, center, outward, and I can do the inward center. So this is the one which is kind of semi-available because it goes inward in the sense that the left would go probably underneath the right hand if that one has to stay center. But if the combination is such that the right hand is already out, then the in would be towards that right hand. Okay, so I can have a combination where I have outward, so let's say center, outward, inward, center. Okay, so that is still a valid combination without crossing the hands. I tend to exclude crossing hands in the combinations that I come up with, just because it's a more natural thing. I don't like, you know, to mess it up like that. And then I have a press roll, what we call in the drums, which is a kind of type sound, which it has a double duration. The reason I'm getting here again to 5 different things is that the 5 is a crucial number in coming up with combinations for this book. Because I have 5 lines on a single page, I like things to, you know, fully fit on pages and be really nice and symmetrical. So whenever I can, I come up with 5 combinations, because the multiplication of that always yields something that is divisible by 5. So these combinations tend to fit nicely on these sheets that I'm producing. Okay, and then I have the triples combination. So here I didn't do anything with inside, nothing with the press roll. So it's actually fairly straightforward. So for a triple, I have outward, center, 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 out, center, 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 out, 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 center, and center, out, out. So these are actually quite worthwhile playing with. So typically, the way the drummers think is like, well, you know, if I can play 3 things with one hand, then I can play that same thing on different instruments. And that does not hold. So the precision is lost, the dynamics are lost, things start to feel awkward. So actually to learn these motions, so if I go out, center, center, okay, I can go center, out, center. Okay, so to get these motions quite natural, you know, being able to use the bounce from one instrument to bounce you over to the next one is actually mechanically not trivial. So practicing these things I find quite crucial. And then in terms of devising all the G5 moving combinations, what I have then is these variations. And within these, each one can work with either of these. So for example, just to start with the simplest one, if I have a 1, 2, 2, it means I have 2 doubles. So each of the doubles can have 5 different versions. So the number of total combinations is 5 times 5, 25. Okay. Here with one both and all the rest ones, I will have only 1 double. So actually I have 5 different combinations in total with this. Okay, so that's my 5 moving principle, which actually introduces these other 2. Okay, now on to the H. That's the 7th chapter of the book, excluding introduction. What I have essentially is something which is not a huge principle, but it's a rather exhaustive set of combinations, up to 360 bars here, many pages, where I actually have 3 basic rhythms. One I call hop, the other one I call bop, and the third one I call fill, which are scored out on the top hand. And then the bottom hand goes through shifting of different sets of combinations. Okay, so let me briefly introduce the hop, bop, and the fill. So the hop, it's all 7/8. So the hop is a bit of a 4+3, and it's supposed to relate to hip hop because it has a very strong downbeat. So it's as follows. Okay, so it has this one leading note, and it actually hammers down all the main accents here. It was probably the first kind of division and the thing that I played in odd meters as a kid, because it kind of goes it really has a kind of a, it's a downbeat heavy thing, and it's probably the easiest one to make such that you're not thrown off as an amateur listener, that you actually get the sense of downbeats repeating and they don't surprise you. The next one is the bop. I choose the bop name because it really lends itself for fast ride playing. I've also noted the accents, which are here quite crucial. And for those of you who know some technique, this fingering technique is quite crucial for fast ride patterns. So actually, instead of playing two notes with the same motorical, in the same way, what you do is you do the open close. So you do the, and this allows you to play really fast two notes up to actually not being able to discern it, because you kind of grab the stick as soon as it bounces the first time, and you can sync it such that you get really, really fast doubles like that. And then the triples like that with the accent in the end is a similar thing, except you add a little finger motion. So go. And again, it's the technique that allows you to go really fast. So actually this bop pattern is one of each. So it's which mounts up to become really fast ride pattern if you wish it. And actually with this type of stick, the bounce is minimal, so it doesn't really lend itself to this. It's more of a regular stick thing. Okay, and then I have the fill pattern, which is the one below, which goes ta-tum, 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 ta-tum. So it has a kind of opening, especially the way the accents are notated. So it opens and closes, which is the kind of, it doesn't really groove as much as the previous two, but if you're developing fills on drums, then these things prove quite cool to work with. So what I have then is, for one of these patterns, I go through all the single combinations, all the doubles, all the two singles, triple, single, double, three. So actually this is a fairly exhaustive set. I don't go to 6 strokes, for example, and I think I'm missing the 1+4 as well. Just because it's really easy to play them looking at the basic score. But this is a really crucial set of exercises because the symmetry, the kind of the generative rule behind these is fairly simple. And if you can read music, you can actually play through this no problem. But then to be able, as I said, to groove it is a whole lifetime. But then on top, once you get there, to be able to do all the combinations in your head becomes a really interesting challenge, and definitely opens up the intuitive field. So I don't know, I don't want to play too much. Maybe I can do this one, the 7/8 bop pattern with 1 single and 1 double. Okay, so that's hopefully that exhaustive thing. Let's see if I'm still quite sane to do this. So. Okay, I didn't play the last bar, but you get the idea. The funny thing with these is if you play them through, you actually get the triple here, for example. And what I do in order to avoid that, once the pattern reaches over to the beginning of the bar, then I change patterns halfway. You might have caught me doing that to avoid the triple, to get the natural kind of 1 single, 1 double, one after the other. Okay, so those are the 7 patterns. As you can see, largest chapter, probably my favorite things to play around with. Okay, we're nearing the end. And in that, I'm introducing another concept that helps me organize the combinations and reduce the combinations to the really groovy ones, which is crucially the aim of the book. So what I'm doing here is I'm ordering combinations based on entropy. Okay, so what is entropy? It's a measure of how chaotic things are in layman's terms. And what I'm using is I'm using Shannon's entropy, which is an equation that you can implement. I'll play around with it as a matter of demonstration. So first of all, this is my, I mean, in this set of codes, I have many other things as well. In fact, generating the combinations, then ordering them and all the rest. So these last 2 chapters are kind of generatively produced. I mean, previous ones are generatively produced as well, only these are computed rather than, you know, just me figuring it out on paper. So what is entropy here? So you take a list and each element you multiply with the log2 of that value. And then you sum all of those elements and typically you get a negative number, so you make it positive. So it's a kind of a mind-boggling thing to understand why would this procedure, this way of processing a list, give you a value that has anything to do with how chaotic the list is as a whole, especially because there is nothing that relates to all the elements as a whole. You actually do a bit of computation on every single element, and then you just sum those things, and you get a value that relates to the regularity of the list as a whole. So it's a lovely thing to exercise your mind with. But just as a matter of practicalities, and I'm gonna show you how it pans out with different lists. Let me just try to get all of this nice and visible somewhere next to my lovely face. Okay, so here is the entropy of values of 3 ones. Okay, the entropy value is 1.58. Okay, so as I said, a list which is regular like this is supposed to give you a value that represents that. So if I make it slightly more irregular, if I make it 1, 2, 1, you see it's diminished. If I make this 1, 3, 1, it diminishes even further. Okay, wonder what happens with the 1, 3, 2. Okay, so it went up a bit, but it is still lower than 1, 2, 1, which was 1.5. Okay, so what it does then, it gives you a lot of, it gives you a way of assessing, automatically assessing what is the regularity here. So when you apply this to rhythm, well, first of all, how do I apply this to rhythm? I take these numbers to represent durations. So this is 1/8 note, this is 2/8 note, so it's a fourth, and this is a 1/8 again. So this is a kind of a 4/4 syncopation, tac, 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 okay. I mean, I could do it with zeros as well. The only thing I found that this actually makes more sense. So I could actually say 1, 1, 0, 1 to represent that same rhythm, if you see what I'm saying. But the fact is that if I work without notating rests, but instead notating durations, this measure of entropy allows me to distinguish between rhythms that are well spaced and that are bunching together. Okay, so for example, if I take a 9-8 situation and I talk about bunching, let's say I have 4 strikes, and if they're all bunched together, then this would be 1, 1, 1, and 6. And if I have 4 strikes and they're spaced out, then I would probably have something like 3, 2, 2, and 2. Okay, so it has to add up to 9. So this will be entropy 1.4 and this is 1.9. So I can crucially distinguish between these things. And then somewhere in between those, I will have, maybe I can have a 5 here and a 2 here. So I get a neat value in between those. So they're not totally bunched. They're not maximally spaced out. But they're somewhere in between. Okay, so this is the algorithm that I use to determine how spaced things are, indeed, in other terms, how bunched they are. So this is the organizing principle for looking at combinations in this situation. So I have a fixed density, which means I have a fixed number of hits per bar. And then I can order them according to entropy. The other side of this coin is sparsing. So you see, I can order them according to highest entropy. So what I'm trying to do with the 9-8 is I'm trying to extract the combinations which are totally bunched together. And with 11-8, it's kind of a larger structure. So I'm suffering from potentially losing the groove, okay? So I'm actually making sure that they're sparsely organized such that I get the sense of time like that. So those two are entropy-based organization principles. And then finally, grooving, which combines the entropy and indispensability. Okay, so what's happening there is that I have a bunch of combinations and I order them according to entropy, and I plot that against their indispensability value. Okay? So what happens there, typically a lot of different rhythmical variations will have the same value for indispensability. So I do get a kind of a linear organization, kind of vertical lines coming out of this. Entropy is slightly less quantized like that, but it also happens that you get a few combinations with the exact same entropy value. So what you do with this, well, I'm trying to order them such that I get the grooviest rhythms, okay? So in order to get the grooviest rhythms, I need the hits to be indispensable, which means that they're actually on the accents of the bar and then progressively going to less important metric positions. And I need them to be sparse. Okay, so it won't groove much if I have, you know, just in the middle of somewhere, but I'm trying to get them as sparse as possible. So one way of organizing such a two-dimensional set is just the distance from the origin. So I could say, well, actually I take, which is just the Pythagoras, right? So if I look at this distance here, then it's actually the this value squared, that's I squared, and then E squared, the one plus the other, and then the square root of that. Okay, that's your Pythagoras right there. So I can actually calculate the distance to the origin for each of these rhythmic variations and order them accordingly, such that, you know, I never get stuff which is too bunched, but very indispensable, or the other way around. So it's a way of finding a balance between the two, and indeed finding the grooviest rhythms. And then the other algorithm I came up with in order to avoid the bunching issues. So what do I mean by a bunching issue? What you would get typically is you can get really large jumps. Okay, so for example, if I take this distance, and this distance, okay, they're almost similar. So if I order strictly according to this distance, then what I will get is jumping between rather unrelated rhythms. Okay, so instead, what I come up with is a way of making sure that I go the shortest path between these variations. So indeed, I start with the most distant one, but then the algorithm says, look at the next one on indispensability axis. It would be this one. And look at the next one on the entropy axis, which would be this one. Okay. And then look at the distance between those and pick the one which is closest by. So you kind of get a trajectory which takes into account the fact that I don't want a huge jump in either of these dimensions. I'm actually interested in traversing through these combinations such that the combinations that follow each other are actually related more than otherwise. Okay, well, that's that. So wish me luck for completing this book and getting it published and all the rest of that. And then spending the rest of my life playing this stuff. So thanks for your attention. And goodbye.